I'd like to introduce Rick Stevens, my friend.
Tony, thanks very much. Can you all hear me without the mic, or should I stand behind the mic? Yeah, and I don't know if someone's videoing, but first, my apologies for being late. I was with my youngest daughter in Columbia, South Carolina over the weekend, and we had a little delay coming back to Chicago through Atlanta last night. And airplane's a little late, got in about 1 o'clock in the morning, and when the alarm went off this morning at 3, I didn't respond to it well. So my apologies. Hey, it's great to be back here. As I was telling Tony, while I was involved in the activity in 1996 with regard to privatization of the depot, I think my history back to Heath goes back some 25 years, because I started my career at the Boeing Company in guidance control systems for intercontinental ballistic missiles, a little system called MX, or Peacekeeper. And an important part, the good news about Peacekeeper is so damn good that it got itself taken out of business. So in terms of being a protectorate of our nation and providing a good strategic deterrent. But the real reason I wanted to come back here and appreciate the invitation, and particularly appreciate your attention this morning, is really talk about future workforce. If you think about my career, I did a little bit of math this morning. In the time I've been leading human resources in Boeing, we've probably brought in about 66,000 new employees over that period. And today we're about 175,000 employees in the Boeing Company. What's very interesting to observe, and it's fairly consistent no matter where I happen to have the opportunity to see and observe, to what goes on in the community here, and that is we've been giving and telling our students, our children, for the last 3 or 4 decades, if you want to be successful in life, go to college and get a college education. And I'm one who's about stirring the pot a bit. My view is we ought to be telling our kids, go figure out what your passion is and what you can do to have gainful employment, and go get the education to be able to support that. Because the fact is, a college education does not guarantee a job, and as a company who spends about $100 million a year sending our employees back to school, it's great when it's aligned to our business needs. But we have too many kids going to college that have no idea what they want to go do. And as a result, come out from college with huge debt and looking for a job and say, but I did everything you asked me to go do. I got my education, I went to college, I can't find a job. And as opposed to, no, I grew up, I had a passion for what I wanted to go do, I got the skills necessary. Sometimes that's about going to college, sometimes it's not. And I would contend, particularly in the digital world that we live in today, we have, in fact, I would do a little poll. How many of you, when you first started work, had a computer on your desk? Okay. A few of you. How many of you do today? Okay. How many of you growing up played or spent most of your time outside? Okay. How many of you thought along the way as you were playing outside you did something so dumb it's probably going to kill you or significantly maim you along the way? Okay. And I'm there too. Now, how many of us have kids? We're parents or grandparents. Okay? How many of our kids spend the amount of time outside that we did? Or our grandkids? And I would contend that that time outside in the real world is critical to development. Now, I'm a guy who's got, between my wife and I, we have 6 kids and 9 grandkids. The oldest of the grandkids, James, is now 15. The youngest of the grandchildren, Rosie is 4 months. Actually, Rosie just turned 5 months yesterday, so 5 months. And we look at what the kids need. It's not more digital time, okay? And as we think about the role that we create as parents or grandparents, okay, and think about the number of our kids or grandkids that have TVs in the bedroom, computers in the bedroom, cell phones in hand, and there's more texting and digital dialogue going back and forth, but that's not what's needed. Success requires the ability, in my view, to have a job and sustain themselves economically. Second, to be able to communicate and interact with others. Okay. Third is to recognize that you've got to be able to participate in governance, because that's what democracy is all about. Fourth is to be able to learn, recognize that there's new technology, new developments every day, so unlearn and relearn. And fifth is the past is interesting, but it's the future that's important. And I believe, I'm one that believes that we've got things backwards. We're so focused on the digital world that it's a major disservice to our kids. Now, I've been involved, of course, in business for some 30 plus years, like all of us in this room, but I've spent an awful lot of time on the neurological side. And when you begin to look at what's going on at places like the iLabs at the University of Washington, or you look at what's gone on at the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential, who've studied children for the last 60 years, all the data is the same. The data tells us that while we only use, in theory, we talked about 10% of our brain being used for thinking, we really do use all of our brain, because 90% of it's taking care of all the things we don't have to think about. How we move, how we breathe, all the bodily functions. And from the time a child is born, we have the ability to have a significant impact on the capacity and capability of the brain by simple things of movement, reading, multisensory input. Those are critical, important things to neurological development that give us the capacity going forward. Now, and therefore, I would contend we don't need computers. In fact, we don't need computers early on in life. They're certainly great tools later on. But how long does it take our kids to pick up a digital device and figure it out? I notice I didn't say us. We're a little slower in that field. But our kids, it takes a nanosecond. Okay? And yet, many of us want to put a computer in front of our kids early on in life. And all the data now from the neurologists saying it's exactly the wrong thing to go do. Exactly the wrong thing until the child is 5 or 6. Now, certainly there are marketing products out there about teaching your baby how to read sooner or later. It's not developing the neurology. And when you close the synapses, okay, earlier on in life, you build capacity that's so critical and important to be successful going forward in an ever-changing world. Now, another important piece of data. There's something that happened very important in the mid-80s that we all observed about the wall coming down in Eastern Europe. Okay, it certainly added a couple 100 million people to democracy. But the thing, in my view, far more importantly going on at the same time was the explosion of the internet. And in a very short period of time, about 2 billion people, about 2 billion got access to the same information that we enjoyed here in America. It fundamentally changed society as we knew it, because we had 2 billion more people competing for what was going on. 2 billion more. And so information used to be precious in terms of us having access to it. It's now very simply a commodity. There's more information out there, and yet we're trying in our education systems to put more information into our kids when we ought to be helping our kids early childhood neurological brain development so they have the capacity to take on new thoughts, new ideas, to organize that information to be able to go compete in the global marketplace. Because it's not what we know, it's how we put to work what it is that we can go figure out. And with information and knowledge being expanded so quickly, it's how we apply it. And therefore, I contend the more we're involved with our kids early on with hands-on experiential activity, the far better off we'll be. What's going on here at the Works is phenomenal. It's get the kids down and dirty and involved. Get them to learn the skills. Not only the technical skills, but the soft skills. Now, having in the last 2 years put 9,000 new employees in the airplane factories at Boeing, let me tell you, it used to take us 7 weeks to train someone to give them the basic skills to go in the factory. It now takes us double that, nearly 14 weeks. And it's not because it's any more complex building an airplane. Not at all. It's the same things. But when you talk to kids, and see, how many of you are soccer coaches or involved with kids early on, okay, or baseball coaches, or any coaches out in the community? I contend if you think back last 10 years ago and compare the capability of kids today about where they were 10 years ago, you'll find they're slower to learn how to run. They have tougher issues in terms of throwing balls. They have tougher issues interacting with others, because in many cases they're growing up in the digital world as opposed to that world that is so interactive. Talk to elementary school teachers and ask them how the students are today. And yet we place so much on schools, and I would contend one of the important things, and again what goes on here at the Works, getting parents involved with kids earlier on is critically important to develop the capability and capacity to go forward. That hands-on, that interaction. Now I spent a few years in the Marine Corps. I get the opportunity to spend time with senior leaders. Had dinner with the Assistant Commandant of the Marine Corps here about 4 months ago. A really interesting dialogue. I said, hey, how are things going on with recruits in the Marine Corps? He says, these kids come in motivated, energized to want to go serve their country, but they can't fight. What do you mean they can't fight? He says, we don't allow them to have interactions on the playground or at recess. And so, how many of you have been in the service? Okay, you remember such things called pugil sticks? Okay, and that's, for those of you not familiar, it's the basic when you learn hand-to-hand combat, which you hope you never have to use, but you got to be ready for it. So it kind of starts you out, whether it's a boot camp or whatever, with something called pugil stick. Broomstick, a big ball on one end, and a big soft ball on the other end, and the idea is you go literally try and beat the crap out of the guy who's on the other side. They put you in helmets, gloves, and all that so you're well protected. Well, just think about if you're in a combat environment and you got to go into a fight, okay, and what's that fight look like? And you kind of get, he says, Rick, we're getting these young recruits out now who walk up and say, well, I've never actually punched someone or taken a punch. And yet these are the things we used to get as kids growing up on the playground, which are important, and we don't allow our kids to do that anymore. That's a representative of what goes on in the world from the military, but just think about the competitive environment we're going against. The Chinese, the Russians, they don't care about our lifestyle. They want it. They're competing handily for it. And so this notion about hands-on interaction skills. Now, going back to the airplane factory, simple skills like how to handle a screwdriver, okay, how to handle a drill, how to do wire assemblies. In the Boeing Company, we paid pretty well building airplanes. Okay, and I would contend, if you got good skills out of high school with hands-on application, some of those are making more money than the psych, majors that have come out of college who are all looking for a job. And that's why I go back to it is all about a job. How many of you have cars? Oh, good, okay. How many of you can now work on your cars today? Okay, a few of you. Okay, I gave up on that a long time ago. I remember, I blew a cylinder on my 1974 Volkswagen. One engine had one weekend dropped the engine, rebuilt it, put it all back together again. I wouldn't even think about that today. Okay? Yet auto mechanics make doggone good money, and that's not a job that's going to be outsourced overseas. Those are jobs here. But by and large, we have a hard time finding people to be auto mechanics doing our jobs, making darn good money. Some large cities, go to auto mechanics, $100,000 a year. Okay, $100,000 a year because they have the skills and capabilities. All this coming back around to the point that our world, while it may be digital about sharing information, our success as those in business and as employers, we play team sports. And we need kids and those who are growing up that have hands-on, practical application, who work in teams, who have the ability to communicate and interact with others, and it starts early on. Okay, it starts early on in life from the time the child is born. I'll give you one other statistic. Banneker Elementary School in Gary, Indiana. Now, Gary, Indiana, was a great community. We all grew up as from the Music Man. Okay, Gary, Indiana, is a steel town. It's what it's always been. However, over time, from an economic standpoint, one of the highest areas of unemployment, even though they build like 9 million car bodies there a year. Okay? Also one of the highest crime rates. The reason I have no Gary, Indiana, we park our corporate aircraft there. We've got 7 aircraft we park at Gary, Indiana. At Banneker Elementary School, there's a school there that for the last 22 years has been in the top 10% of all elementary schools in the entire state of Indiana. In many cases has been number 1. Now the reason I raise that is it's also the poorest of the poor. The kids are on free breakfast, they're on free lunch. Many of the kids take backpacks home for the weekend, so they've got a meal for the weekend. Parents are working 2 and 3 jobs, both the mothers and the fathers. Okay? And yet, here's the poorest of the poor, one of the best performing schools in the entire state. Why is that? A couple things. One, when you think about education today, and you know, my view is, God, how many are teachers or educators here? Are there any? Can I give you all a hug later on? Okay? You all have the toughest job that I can think of anyone, bar none. Why? Because we in society tend to relegate to you, our children. We don't always get them ready and say, go do good things, and if our kids don't come back educated, we blame you. And I think that's the wrong thing to go do. Because education is more than about what you learn in the classroom. It's about having the right decorum, perspective, and what the parents do to get the kids ready to go to school. Again, back to Banneker. So the poorest of the poor. And it's because the leadership they have there is Sarah Gibbons. Now what did Sarah do? And Sarah's been there for 22 years. As the principal, Sarah said, well, okay, they're poor, they're economically challenged. These parents don't know about college because they're working 2 and 3 jobs, yet we can probably help raise the standard. All of these kids know how to read in kindergarten. Okay? All of these kids go on, and most of them, as they've done the longitudinal studies, work their way off to college. What's there about? Dedication, determination, discipline. Every one of these kids comes in and know when you go talk to them, you don't just show up at Banneker Elementary and spend 20 minutes. You spend 2 hours with Sarah every time you go see her, because she will take you to every classroom, whether you want to go there or not. Okay? Every one of those kids, from the time they're kindergarten, have a sense about what they want to do in the workforce. Every one of those kids knows why the curriculum they're taking is important for them to be successful. Every one of those kids doesn't get choices about what they do. They all participate in their science fair programs. They all participate in the activities they have, and yet these kids have no money. What has she done that's unique? One, we all know that when parents are involved in school, you get significantly better results out of the children. Can't get parents to say, what does she do? She brings in the grandparents. Okay? A huge outreach, and what child, particularly kindergarten or elementary school to 6, wouldn't want their grandparent at a school? And she has tied the results of that with getting grandparents in, provides the linkage back to the parents, provides the linkage back to the students. The other thing is said that she's done is she makes sure that these kids understand it's about the job first, because when they know what they want to do for a job, it provides the motivation and incentives for education. Whether they want to be a fireman, whether they want to be a college professor, all of these kids have a sense about what the future is. And I would contend if we had greater connectivity between what a principal and teachers do and the parents, we'll be far better off. And it's not about economics, because I'm in too many places where the poorest of the poor are far outperforming those who have financial resources. But it is about leadership. And so the role that you all have as community leaders, whether it's here at the Works, the engagement you have with the schools, the engagement you have with the parents, in my mind, is what's going to continue to allow the community to be successful and be able to go forward. But these are important elements. It starts from the time a child is born. It's critically important all the way through. But get the kids outside and turn off the damn computers. And as you said, in our family, our kids have to go to school before they're allowed to have a child. It's tough for them, but they have to go to a school in Philadelphia. And the grandkids, they're communicating and talking at 18 months. They're reading at the age of 3, and there's nothing unique about the genealogy of the Stevens household. It's the environment we create in terms of our kids, and when we enable the neurological development and we enable the right environment and we keep the digital products away from the kids, we're far better off. Last element, why do we keep the digital products away from the kids? Go look at iLabs University of Washington. If you just do a side-by-side comparison of a baby who is 6 months old and look at the neurological patterns of when they're communicating with a flat panel display and compare that brain activity with communication with a real person, there's no doubt about it. Everyone says, I want the baby who's got the brain from communicating with the real parent. Now that's remarkable. And Tony mentioned I'm on the board for Digital Promise. A huge debate we're having right now at the national level about when do you introduce computers in the classroom. And I'm for one that says keep them away as long as you can. Because the facts are, when I'm going to go off and hire someone, I want someone who's done something in the real world, not something who's done in the digital world. And we're on the car on the way out. I'll share a little bit of a story about, when you think about training and education and some of the complex things that go on at the depot here, about the spinners, that we designed decades ago and are being maintained here, the gyros, whether it's the Pigas or the gyros that are in the guidance control systems for the Minuteman. It's one thing to be able to look at a drawing and see a digital representation. It's another thing to actually get your hands on it. Okay? And I'll leave you with one last example. Okay, how many of you fly in airplanes? Meaning you're a passenger. Almost all of us. Okay? How many of you would prefer a pilot that's got all their time on a simulator versus actually have experience in a real airplane? Okay, it's a no-brainer. It is a no-brainer. And yet, just think about, we're educating our kids in a digital world, asking them to interact in the real world, and they need real hands-on practical experience. And so if there's ever a doubt on that, always err on the side of real hands-on practical experience. When they have that, they can take the knowledge and apply it and create opportunities for growth from an economic standpoint, for jobs, and they'll be better in the community, and they'll be able to interact with others. And I'll just keep saying one last. Parents, we're the parents, we're the ones raising our kids. Next time your child whips out their iPhone and wants to, if you happen to live in a 2-story house and they text you, hey mom or dad, what time's dinner? Okay, don't respond. Okay, remember, we're the parents. We're trying to help create an environment for them. But this digital world is too easy to communicate and interact with others. Just don't respond and see if they show up for dinner. And they will. But if you respond and tell them, they don't need to come down and interact with you. So create more opportunities for interaction and dialogue. They'll be far better off when it comes time for them to go out of the house. They'll be able to get that job that's so critically important. So I applaud you for the work that's going on here. Again, I apologize for being late here this morning. It's great to be back in Heath, and I'm looking for the opportunity to get out the facility, and would be happy, depending upon your time, to respond to any questions you may have. Any questions?
People ponder questions. One of our board members, Joe, actually has 15,000 hours as a pilot in a Boeing aircraft.
Oh, outstanding. Cool.
It's a good machine.
Yeah, great machines, yes. One of my passions has always been I want to learn how to fly. I'm actually working on getting my pilot's license now. Yeah, I want to go fly a T6 Texan, which is a World War II trainer. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Am I full of it, or does this make sense to you? Yes?
I just have a question. So taking your theory forward, and by the way, I think your message is very refreshing. If you're reskilling, if you're in a point where you're having to reskill older workers in the workplace
Yep.
to technology, I think the common thought is that's going to be more difficult. What you're saying is they grew up in the outside world. It might not be as difficult as what people assume it's going to be, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so I think it's a great comment. I think the challenge is how to help them gain the knowledge that they're going to need to go forward and help them recognize it's time to move, because things are going to move much quicker. then I think many of us who were in the workforce from some time ago are used to seeing the change in the dynamics. And I think that's the challenge on the senior workforce, which the younger folks don't have. They're willing to move very, very quickly. But it's a matter of getting them the knowledge and then get them the hands-on, they'll go figure it out. Yeah. But that's the bigger issue. And I think most have kind of figured it out. You know, there was the big battle about outsourcing, you know, a couple decades ago. Gee, my job's being taken away. Well, that was strictly from a cost standpoint and whether it got outsourced to the next county over, the next state over, the next country over. Huge. I was reading the Wall Street Journal this morning about a plant, and I can't recall, they make snap-together toys. They're bringing business back from China. They have figured out what it takes to be innovative and creative to bring those jobs back home. I think we're going to see more and more of that. But it's this hands-on, let's get innovative, as opposed to whining about, let's go make sure we protect our jobs to bring them back. Yes, sir.
Just to follow up on that, so as the workforce is transitioning, you have an older workforce, skilled, new workforce coming in, is the value of an apprenticeship less important these days because the workforce is aging and what they're doing is not transitioning well to the younger workforce, so you're inventing a new workforce? Is that something Boeing is struggling with, or maybe you figured it out?
No, I wish we had figured out, and you bring up an important point, apprenticeships. I think we've gone away from apprenticeships, the term apprenticeships, into more on-the-job training. And one of the things, as we looked at our age demographics, the number of people retiring out of Boeing and or ramping up production rate building commercial airplanes, we brought more people in the factory too soon. And as a result, we're paying for it. And when I say paying for it, they didn't have the skills necessary to be successful because we, like many, had cut back on our apprenticeship programs. Our push is to get those reinstated and do a much better job understanding our age demographics about when we're going to need people and bring them in to be able to meet our needs. I started about 7 years ago a group called Strategic Workforce Planning within Boeing because looking ahead, I said, you know, we're not going to be able to rely on the same workforce talent coming in because you just go out and grab people, pull them in, pull them in, pull them in. But this whole notion today, there aren't the people with the same skills that were out there. You know, building airplanes, if you worked on cars, worked on boats, you could work on an airplane. Fairly straightforward, fairly easy. All that pipeline's dried up. And so we do have to invest in, you know, giving people the basic skills they need to be successful in apprenticeship programs. So what we learned is we got to get people earlier along in the pipeline. There's a couple things that I can talk to specifically. One is, in Illinois, we're rolling out something called career pathways. We looked and said, you know, kids are going to go to college or they're going to go out in the workforce. One of the two things. And about half are going to go to college, the other half are not. Why not make sure when kids come out of college, they're job ready, as opposed to, now that I finished, now I got to go figure out what I want to go off and do. We have 9 curriculum that we're intending to put 2 curriculum in every high school in the state of Illinois. And we business are writing the curriculum. And we're going to go partner businesses with high schools and make sure we hire from those schools to bring them in. So the kids, when they come out, they're actually ready to go to work. Now, some could say that goes back to the vocational education training that many of us got. My reaction is it's a notch up. Because when we're helping write the curriculum and getting hands-on and job ready, and they are in manufacturing, IT, healthcare, agriculture, general business skills. You know, these are things that I think the high schools would like to go do, but we have to help them do the curriculum about what we need in the marketplace. So that's one element, you know, at the high school level. At the community college level, and many around many different states, partnering at the community college level. We have something called the Water Center in the state of Washington. It's the Washington Aerospace Training and Research Center, where we actually are hiring 80% of the students out of the Water Center. Community college, we wrote the curriculum for the community college so that these kids who are coming out of high school not job ready can go get the skills necessary that we need to go build airplanes. And, you know, all the hands-on practical application. We took Boeing tools, Boeing equipment, and moved it in there. And so it's a great partnership with the state, and it's, in essence, the apprenticeship programs. The number of people we have in our machine shops, you know, whether it's labor or non-labor, working with the apprenticeship programs there to get them trained. You know, in terms of numerically controlled machine requires more than basic math skills. But getting those that says, yeah, I want to go do that, that's my vocation, and how do I help myself going forward? So these apprenticeship programs, I think they're coming back. I think they're exactly the right thing to go do. And whether we call them apprenticeship programs or not, but we have to recognize people are where they are, and we need them in the workforce. We have a responsibility to help get them trained. If we can push that further in the pipeline, the better off we are. And then when you look at programs like First Robotics and others, you know, the kids are getting their hands on in high school and something to go build robots, go compete. You know, one of the things we love about First Robotics, it's a phenomenal program. We sponsor over 200 teams in First Robotics around the U.S., put $1 million into it a year. And we see these kids coming out, they're ready to go to work or they're off ready to go to college. So it's, again, it's all this hands-on practical application we focus on. It really pays dividends. Yes, sir, in the back.
So you've talked a lot about what Boeing has been able to do, and we're sitting in a community that's figured out how to pool resources and get it done. And you've seen a lot of communities, and you've seen a lot of different programs. What's your advice for the business community in an area of this size, businesses, typical business sizes being what they are? What's your advice for creating similar kind of success in their world?
You know, it's a great question because we all have the challenges, and while the challenge remains the same, how we approach it is different based upon the communities that we're in. I'll give an example. In Santa Ana, California, where the college readiness rate was 17% college ready. The community right next door, Irvine, California, had a college readiness of 80%. Same curriculum, same books, same everything. 80%, 17%. It had nothing to do what was going on in the classroom. It's all about getting the students ready. And how do we approach that? Santa Ana, heavily Hispanic, mostly Catholic from a religious standpoint. We spent a lot of time with the churches and used that as an opportunity to educate parents. We got the parents involved. 5 years later, college readiness rate 34%. And it was just a phenomenal transformation about engaging parents, and no change at all with the school. The reason I bring that example up, you all are the best to understand what's going on in your community, what your age demographics are, what your demographics are from an ethnicity standpoint, what the demographics are from a financial standpoint, and whether it's the Banneker or Santa Ana or others, what you're doing of bringing everyone together is exactly the way to start. And be able to have the straight up discussions about where are our opportunities, where are our risks, and where are we falling down. My sense is where the most success is where businesses come together, they go work with the educational organizations to make sure that the education programs are necessary to meet what kids need all the way through. Having programs, here like, at the works in terms of the hand-on application, and then engaging the parents. And my view is that's the biggest challenge that we have, is getting the parents engaged so they see the potential for their children going forward. Particularly communities, it's all been about whatever large industry was there or the largest employer. And when parents see their kids have an opportunity beyond, and they're willing to be engaged, but parents have got to buy in really to those discussions and be participating. Now, I think one of the biggest missing opportunities is all the community-based organizations, whether it's United Way, Boys and Girls Club, all those opportunities where you can pull those together. And frankly, one of the biggest challenges we have, because we get asked for philanthropic dollars, for every dollar we give out, there are 20 requests for those dollars. And the discussions we tend to have is, gee, this program does this program over here does exactly the same thing. Why don't you eliminate your overhead and smash those two together? That's a big emotional discussion, because the two organizations' infrastructures look and say, but maybe the job that I have is going to go away because the not-for-profit I lead, if I align with another one, I may be out of a job. Hey, I understand that, but it's also, if we're trying to get the biggest bang for the buck, the resources, the time, and the effort, back to really improving the community, those are the tough decisions that need to occur. And I believe businesses have the potential to do that with the leadership that we can provide and how we allocate our resources. And then I said, looking at, where are the soft spots? There's an exercise that I do where we get community leaders together, we put butcher paper on the wall and look at the community that's gone on for the last 60 years. What's occurred, what are the strengths, what are the weaknesses been? And then do the evaluation of, but where are the holes and how do we fill those gaps in and what resources can we bring together? My sense is you all are headed down that path, but those are the sorts of things that can occur if it's about the community itself and the businesses to be successful and the educational organizations to get there. But the big challenge, the fact is there is no more money. And we have to start from that premise. There is no more money that we can all go after, whether it's at the state level, at the federal level, or at the local level. And so we have to live within the resources that we have. And when we start from there, our mindset shifts quickly to, hey, we're on our own. Because it all has to occur locally and business leaders can go off and do that. I don't know if that helps or not, a little abstract, but I think it's fundamentally where it goes. Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I'm Colonel Vicki Reed. I run Metcal, which is right next door to Boeing. So, as a woman, I'm always interested in how we're reaching out, particularly to girls. And for all of our emphasis on science and technology and education and math, we still don't get the girls in at the same level as the boys. What do you do from, for Boeing, and what do you think we need to do to reach into the community and teach girls that science and math and engineering and technology are careers that they can go into to really support families? What do you think about that?
It's a great question, and certainly an opportunity from a workforce standpoint. My experience has been is we lose them early on because of the stereotypes that tend to occur and the sense about for all the things we do. And yet, I know, in fact, the lady who leads human resources for me at our commercial airplane business out in Seattle, all of her kids are engineers, and she treats the boys and the girls exactly the same. And she's got 4 kids, 2 girls, 2 boys. They're all engineers. It starts early on about the capability and capacity to go off and work that, which goes back to the important role that parents play. And while Julie happens to be an engineer, now working in HR, and I'm a mathematician, computer scientist guy working in HR, it is about the environment we create from our kids earlier on and bringing them in, getting them engaged. And that goes a long ways down the path. But I think it's this, I think that one of the bigger challenges that we have is how the media talks about what can or cannot occur, because the media is a major driver about perspectives, attitude, and ultimate behavior. We're sponsoring an organization called the Entertainment Industries Council, which for the past 26 years has tried to help use mainstream media to influence young people's perspectives about a whole number of subjects. And we have a STEM activity we're off working with them, looking at the TV shows and the mainstream media and movies and how they portray men and women in the science, technology, engineering, mathematics. The fact is, over the last, we did a study, and I don't recall the time period, but we looked at, the number of mainstream characters who are scientists, engineers, mathematicians, about 10%. So you say, okay, 10% mainstream media. And then we looked at how many are good people and how many are bad people. About 70% are bad guys. They create the ill wills about what goes on. The mad scientist, the mad bomber, and as a result of that, kids say, I don't want to go off and do that. Well, it's an important part of also about getting youngsters, the young ladies involved early on, and I would contend it's all about getting them involved early on, just like the boys, because they've got the capacity, but getting them earlier on and making sure they're successful moving forward, because a lot of girls say, yeah, math's too hard, I don't want to go off and do it. And I've got 2 daughters, They get it because we immersed them early on, and it was not hard, it was just something they did. But tying it to a real thing that they can go do that they're interested in. My oldest daughter is a wildlife biologist, and she loves the math and science, and she's been outdoors an awful lot. My youngest daughter, heavily involved in the film industry, and she got involved in the technology side. So I think that's the best way to go work it, is just get them engaged earlier on, and we have to help them go do that. Because a lot of it comes back to our biases about what we do with the girls and the boys. And if we treat them separately, they're going to struggle. And it tends to be about 4th grade, they weed themselves out. So it really is about, by the time at 4th grade, if they're involved, they'll stick with it. If not, they'll drop out. I don't know if that helps or not. There's some organizations out there. There's one called the Nerd Girls out of Purdue University. You know, in the Nerdettes, there's a number of college girls out there working it, but also programs like First Robotics, First Lego League. Get these kids involved earlier. They see part of teams, they can be successful. Then math and science are a snap, and they begin to love it because they see real practical applications in their lives. Yes?
I just had a question. If you had a real example of how you've gotten parents involved in the process, because being on the STEM advisory committee, I think that's one of the difficulties that we've had here is getting the parents engaged and bringing their kids here.
Yeah, and so, and I don't know enough about the community, but there certainly has got to be something that would engage parents early on, and so, wow, and I presume you've done all the normal communication, advertising, all the other things. Have you tied it to, let's see, let me ask a question. How many of us want life to be better for our kids than for us? Okay, that's kind of a universal view, okay? And my view is, if we begin to talk to parents in a way that says, here's an opportunity for your kids to learn more, get more, and be ready for life beyond what we as parents have, they all want to clamor to that. So I think it's about how we spin the message. If we talk about STEM, most parents say, yeah, STEM, that's not for me. I don't understand what that is. I'm not going. Yeah, the kids might enjoy it, but it's about thinking about from how do you engage the parents in a way, and you might do some focus groups. You know, go to the elementary school. You know, and through the PTA, I presume, is PTA around here still good? Okay? You know, and somehow partner with the school and do some focus groups to go gather some information. I suspect most look and say, STEM, interesting, not for me, that's all for the science nerds or for the engineers. And the fact is, it's for kids at all levels, at all age groups, and trying to figure out what grabs onto them. So that's the only thing I can suggest. And again, I go back to the example I talked about in San Diego Unified School District. We reached the parents through the church because they all went to church and they all want more for the kids. And when we explained to them how to get there, let me tell you, those kids who were sloughing off, they got with it, and the schools loved it. And I think it's a matter of how do you reach in the parents in this community in a way that makes sense for them. And then you'll end up bringing them in, and then you'll end up getting involved. But that's where I'd go, and that's what we did in Santa Ana. It was baffling. And we finally figured out church. And I don't think it's necessarily church here, but go to a PTA meeting and at back to school night and hold a couple sessions, and that may provide some insights.
Okay, let's thank our guests. Marcia Downs.
I do have a gift for you. Thank you so much for coming to see us. We have a glass blowing studio here. This was created.
Wow.
It's the clouds, it's
Really
Boeing's
cool.
blue, and
Look
that's
at
for
that.
your desk.
Wow, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you so much for taking your time to come to our community. That just means a huge deal to all of us. Thank you. I want to thank our superintendents of schools, our educators, and our industries here. The Works is so proud to be the connector for education and industry and making a difference in our community. We are so proud of Denison University, Central Ohio Technical College, the Ohio State University at Newark. We are primed to grow the next workforce in Central Ohio, and it's going to take everybody in this room to make it happen. Thank you for your time today. Enjoy the rest of this rainy week that we have, because yesterday was as good as it gets in March. Thank you.